Hi, and welcome to another Elder Watch mini-series. Today we'll continue talking about less common scams of 2024, and today's topic is affinity fraud. This series is brought to you by Elder Watch Colorado. Elder Watch is a 20-plus year collaboration between AARP and the Colorado Attorney General's Office. Elder Watch works to help older Coloradans recognize, refuse, and report fraud and scams, while also working to strengthen older Coloradans' financial literacy and resilience. If you or someone you know has been the victim of fraud, or maybe you think you found a deal online that seems too good to be true and you're not sure if it's real or if it's a scam, go ahead and give us a call. Our phone number is 800-222-4444. Select option 2. My name is Jessica Zawadsky, and I am the program specialist for Elder Watch Colorado. Today we'll be talking about affinity fraud. First, we'll talk about why this is an important topic to know about. After that, we'll get into what affinity fraud actually is. After that, we'll talk about some of the red flags that might indicate that the deal you're hearing about is a little bit of a scam. And then after that, we will end by talking about what to do if you or someone you know has experienced affinity fraud. When I think of affinity fraud, I think of it more as a strategy. It is often used in conjunction with other types of scams, largely investment scams. And scammers do this as a way to maximize their profits and make the scam a little bit easier on scammers and a little bit harder for us to detect. And because affinity fraud takes place within our communities where our guard is down and there's already established trust, people are less likely to be suspicious, and it might take them a little bit longer to pick up on some of those red flags that might pop up. Now, as a result, people are also less likely to report this type of scam because it's within communities and within trusted environments. And due to this trust that's already been established as part of affinity fraud and as part of group membership, victims stand the chance to lose significant amounts because they might not catch it quite as quickly. So now that we know a little bit about why affinity fraud is important, let's talk about what affinity fraud actually is. Affinity fraud is a twist on other scams in that it's a strategy used to find victims and build trust. Often, affinity fraud involves an investment scam. So what actually is affinity fraud? Affinity fraud is a scam that exploits the trust and positive bias between individuals by targeting a specific community with shared interests, identities, or backgrounds. Often in affinity fraud, the scammer will be in or pretend to be in the particular group. In the way that a romance scam uses a romantic relationship to build trust and then unfortunately cash in for a payday, affinity scams use affinity or things that we have in common with each other to lure us into their fraud and their schemes. So because it's already a group that we're in and we trust the people within them, our guard might be lowered a little bit, making things a little bit easier for scammers. The red flags that we'll be talking about today are not just red flags for affinity fraud. Even though the type of scam might be different, scammers usually use the same types of manipulation tactics, so these red flags apply to all different kinds of scams. But the first red flag that I want to talk about is urgency. And by that I mean a manipulation tactic to convey a sense of urgency, pressuring you to act quickly. So a common component of many types of scams, like I said, including affinity fraud, is this sense of urgency. Scammers use this tactic to keep us from thinking things over or talking about them with people that we trust, maybe doing some research on our own. And that sense of urgency kind of forces us to act quickly so that we're not doing that background homework. When we are pushed to make a decision quickly, we may act on our emotions and be less perceptive to these manipulation tactics at play. So let's look at an example of what urgency might look like in affinity fraud. So imagine in your congregation, an individual tells you that they have this amazing investment opportunity, but they tell you that you must act within 24 hours because after 24 hours, the word will have gotten out and you won't have the same opportunity to invest in it. Here, urgency is giving us FOMO, or a fear of missing out. And scammers are knowingly using urgency to manipulate our emotions. Even if this investment might sound too good to be true, especially if you took some time to think it over. You don't want to miss out on the next big thing, right? So that's where that FOMO comes in. And that anxiety might propel us to not think things over in the same way that we might otherwise. Now, in this example, we also see the sinister nature of affinity fraud. So normally, if, for example, let's say you saw something on social media that said, hey, you should invest in this right now, you might not jump on it as quickly. You might think it over a little bit more. However, since this is coming to you, this opportunity is coming from someone in your congregation who you trust, you might be a little bit more likely to jump on this supposed opportunity. And therein lies why affinity fraud is so successful for scammers. There's already this pre-established trust. And so it's changing the way you think about things and the way you evaluate risk. Exclusivity is a common component of affinity scams in particular, given that a huge portion of why these scams work and are convincing is that they rely in some ways on a pre-established exclusivity. It relies on group membership. So in affinity scams, we might see exclusivity as a manipulation tactic and red flag in two ways. First, in the form of you being offered something specifically because of your shared affinity and that group membership. And then secondly, as an exclusive offer just for you specifically. So let's look at two examples of these two types of exclusivity. So, for example, let's pretend that you're in a closed private Facebook group for your college alma mater, and there is a semi-famous TikTok influencer in that group who also went to your alma mater. They tell you that they found a specific mutual fund and say that they are only telling people in that closed Facebook group as opposed to all of their TikTok followers because Wildcats, your school's mascot in this example, have to have each other's backs. Here we see a common component of affinity fraud in that first type of exclusivity. You are only getting this offer because of your shared group identity. So let's look at another example. Another example would be that someone from your quilting group wants to involve you in a real estate deal. They tell you that normally the minimum needed to invest is $1 million, but they have been able to make an exception for you because you're quilting buddies. And so for you, it's only going to be $1,000 needed to invest. Now, here is an exclusive offer just for you specifically, in part because of your shared group affiliation, in part because you're quilting buddies. Now, given this exclusive offer at such a huge discount, you might, not think quite as hard about it, right? It's this exclusive offer. It's just for you. You're getting in at $1,000 instead of $1 million. They might sound pretty good. And just again, this is another way that affinity fraud is really effective, because if a stranger on the street told you about this, you might not jump in as quickly. You might think it's a scam, but given that this is someone that you share an identity with, you're in a group with, you might be a little less suspicious and a little bit more likely to take the risk with this offer. One red flag that's specific to investment scams, really more than others, is the promise of huge returns. So let's look at another example and kind of look at how huge returns might play out as a manipulation tactic and therefore a red flag when it comes to affinity fraud. So let's say you volunteer at a food bank and one of your fellow volunteers who you've been volunteering with for, let's say 2 years, says that they found an investment manager that has given them 12% returns on investment per month. They encourage you to invest $15,000, stating that the average portfolio return is about 8% per year, or about $1,200 on a $15,000 investment. Whereas with this investment manager, you'd be looking at 12% return per month or 144% return per year, which on a $15,000 investment would be $21,600. Now, with the promise of such huge returns, you might be tempted to take a risk on this investment. After all, who wouldn't like to make back their entire investment and then some? But here again, we see the danger of affinity fraud. If a stranger or maybe an acquaintance asked you to invest $15,000 with the promise of a 144% return, you might realize that this is too good to be true. But if you heard about this opportunity from not only someone who you share this group membership with, but somebody who you presume has similar values, I mean, you've both been working at a food bank for 2 years, you might trust them a little bit more, and you might be a little bit more willing, again, to take a risk with the promise of these huge returns. Another red flag that, again, is not just found within affinity fraud is the promise of no risk and guaranteed return. Very few, if any, endeavors are risk-free, and particularly with investment opportunities, there is never really a possibility of a guaranteed return. Now, again, if you've listened to some of my other stuff on the market, we know it's kind of a long-term game unless you're going to be doing day trading, but even then, there's really no guarantee of a return, and there's even less of a guarantee of no risk. So would you be tempted in the following scenario, even though we know that, no risk and guaranteed return doesn't really exist? Let's get into it. So let's pretend that you are on a neighborhood watch committee and your across the street neighbor is also on this committee with you. They tell you that they have an investment opportunity that they have put their entire retirement savings behind because it guarantees a return and there is no risk, unlike investing in the stock market independently, which is never risk-free. Sounds pretty great, right? Now, unfortunately, this is another potential opportunity that is probably too good to be true. And anyone who says guaranteed return, no risk, is probably lying to you. That's definitely a sign of a red flag, and you should be very, very, very wary before you invest into that type of endeavor. The last red flag that I want to talk about is an unregistered broker. And in this context, I'm talking about an investment broker. So let's look at another example. A friend of yours at the gym says that they found an incredible investment firm run by someone else who also works out at your gym. He gives you the investor's card, and you try to look them up on FINRA's broker track, but you can't find any information. When you ask your friend about this, they tell you that this money manager isn't on FINRA's books because he doesn't want to be watched by Big Brother. Now, this is a red flag for a couple of reasons. First, FINRA, or the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, is authorized by Congress to protect America's investors by making sure the broker-dealer industry operates fairly and honestly. FINRA, this broker check specifically, is one of the ways that FINRA works to keep Americans' investments safe. And both brokerage firms and individuals must be registered with FINRA to conduct securities transactions. So if you see a broker who is unregistered, that is very, very shady. And you should probably, again, think twice, if not 3 or 4 times before you invest with that individual, because that is a huge, huge, huge red flag that something unsavory is happening and that it very likely could be a scam. First off, if you've experienced affinity fraud, I'm really sorry. Affinity fraud, similar to romance scams, really preys upon our faith in humanity and our desire for companionship. So I'm really sorry that your trust was violated in that way. And we definitely want to help you move on from the setback. So the first thing that you should do is give us a call. You can reach us at 800-222-4444, select option 2. The second thing that you'll want to do is collect as much evidence as you can. And this is specifically will be helpful potentially with some of the following resources that I'll give you. But if you have information, if you have fake documents, for example, for an investment scam, it's a good idea to try to get those things together. In terms of reporting investment fraud, now, like many other types of fraud, it's not really likely that you'll get your money back, unfortunately, but it's still very important to report it for a lot of different reasons. So the first entity that you should contact is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or you can file a complaint online. You should also contact FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and you should also find your state securities regulator by going to the North American Securities Administration Association, which I will be referring to from here on out as NASAA. The NASAA represents state and provincial securities regulators in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. They have a multifaceted mission of protecting investors from fraud and abuse, conducting investor education, and even more. And in contacting your local regulator, you may be able to file another complaint and also learn about some more area-specific resources. And then lastly, you should consider telling other members of your community or group about your experience. Now, with Affinity Fraud, it's usually not just one person. The scammer is usually trying to target multiple people within a group. And again, that's kind of why it works, because you all trust each other. So if you've realized it's a scam, but maybe other people in the group haven't realized it's a scam, you could really be helping them out. And additionally, you might also be helping people recognize some of those red flags that they should be aware of in the future. Thank you for being here to learn about Affinity Fraud. If you'd like to learn even more, you can go to stopfraudcolorado.gov, or you can go to aarp.org/money/scams-fraud. For all of us here at Elder Watch, my name is Jessica Zawadzki. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you stay safe. We'll see you next time.